Good to see you. And we'll do, no, that'll be fine, actually. Yeah, any questions about this? Get it done early, you get EDCMs for it and all that. Okay, anybody have their Iron Jawed Angels thing? It's due today. If you got that, I'll take that. Any reflections on that film? It's a pretty powerful film. Anything strike you? Questions?
I knew that to get like for women to be able to vote, but I didn't think it was like that hard to get it.
Yeah, that's one of the values of that film. You read about that stuff in a textbook. I remember I watched that film also as a student. And I remember reading in the textbook, and I would see like a political cartoon from the time of a tube down a woman's throat. And I remember just having a thought like, oh, yeah, that sucks. And then seeing it dramatized in film, it was like, oh, that's what was going on. That's what it looks like. Why were they doing that?
Probably have them like under control.
Yeah, but why would they do that? What's going on? What was Alice Paul and those other women, what were they doing? Starving themselves, going on a hunger strike. Now, I don't know about the other women. I don't mean to discount their commitment to the cause. They were deeply committed to the cause. But I can say for sure, Alice Paul was willing to die. Starve herself to death. Make sure you got some notes to take. Starve herself to death. That's a horrible death. That's not just, tell my mom I love her, and then you're out. That's a slow, painful death. The body wants to live, right? Has anyone fasted for more than 24 hours ever? Right, it's exponential. So, yeah, the authorities can't have that happen, right? Alice Paul is a household name, notorious to some, meaning people love to hate her. Others, she's beloved. Either way, the responsibility of a prison is, yes, you're securing people who've broken the law, but you have to keep them safe. And so that would have been a huge controversy if Alice Paul died. And clearly, it would have been a huge controversy because what law did she break? Obstructing traffic, right? She, in reality, she just pissed off powerful people. Did you catch what was on the banner before she got arrested? She was wanting to go to prison. Did you catch what was on there? She was quoting President Wilson. How did she refer to President Wilson?
Arthur Wilson.
Yeah. That means king in German. That was the people, Germany's who we were fighting in World War I. So she was being intentionally antagonistic, right? This is the problem with ego in politics, right? People are going to piss you off when you are in power. A true leader goes, well, that's what they think. I got work to do. Not put them in prison. So this is what's referred to as first wave feminism is what we're seeing here. What is feminism? What is that term?
That try to fight for women's rights.
Yeah, people who are fighting for women's rights. What is it not? Because this term gets confused. How many here people would consider themselves a feminist? if you feel comfortable raising your hand. Because it's not just women's rights. Understand when you just say I'm fighting for women's rights, you can also say I'm fighting for human rights. Gloria Steinem, she was a very famous second wave feminist in the 1970s. When she was asked, what is feminism? Can you define feminism? And she gave a very striking definition. Feminism means that you understand that women are people. So we sort of lose sight of that if we just think, oh, they're just fighting for women's rights, as if they are separated for and not connected to men's rights. Right? If you look at how does this affect men if women are not acknowledged as human beings? What examples did we see in the film of how it really hurt a particular character in this film?
They become like closed off because they're not listening to them.
Oh, certainly, but let's get specific. There's a character in this film, a man, who damaged his own life because of being closed off, his views of women. Who am I referring to? The senator. Right? What did he do to his wife?
Took the custody away, money.
Yeah. First step was, hey, I found out that you're a contributor to NASA. I've taken away your allowance, treating her like a little kid, like a child. And she continued. And she went to the courthouse with her kid as if her kid was actually in danger. No, not really. Right. And yeah, took her children away. That's damaging to him. That traumatized his children. It obviously traumatized his wife. And that's such a powerful scene when he visits her in the prison. What's he end up doing after talking to her for a few minutes? I've watched this film probably several hundred times over the course of my career. He totally surrenders to her. I am sorry. Bows his head. I've been in that situation with my wife. I am so sorry. I know exactly what was going on with him. That's just somebody caught up in his ego, thinking I'm right, I'm going to do, and then you get called out, and it's just like, and now he's in front of his wife who's starving to death. I'm only doing this for my girls. And he immediately understands what she means by that. What does she mean by that? I'm doing this. The only reason why I'm here is for them.
But that doesn't happen to them.
Yeah. Having somebody, and again, it's damaging to him. You saw that one scene of him with his tie kind of disheveled, his hair was a mess. He's sitting alone, reading the poetry of his wife, who was hiding it the whole time. That was a deeply dysfunctional marriage. Did you kind of appreciate what was going on when he's coming home to tell her the president has declared war, World War I against Germany? What was she doing prior to that?
She was like rehearsing how she was going to tell him.
Yeah. How is that manifest of a really dysfunctional marriage?
You shouldn't need to do that. You need to like trust your partner.
Yeah. Hey, if you have a problem with your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, just an issue, a healthy relationship is, hey, you got 5 minutes? And no, I don't. Oh, how about when's a good time for you? Because I got some stuff I need to talk to you about. That's what healthy people do. But she's scared. So she's like rehearsing it. And I got something to say. She's trying to get the right tone. She's scared of her husband. That's not a marriage. So when we talk about feminism, when we talk about the patriarchy, it's not just, as you see, it's not just bad for women and children. The possibility that children can be ripped away from their mothers. Talk about a violation, right? I deeply love my children, but that love does not even come close in comparison to how my wife loves our children. Those children were part of her body. I had to kind of warm up to my kids. That's a real thing. Like, you're just like, it doesn't do anything. Okay, cool. I know I'm exaggerating, right? It's deeply meaningful, but that's a real lived experience for a father. You're like, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll change diapers if you're real helpful, but it doesn't talk. But I think there's something entirely different going on with a mother. That's a real thing, right? Mama bear. And you saw that. I think they characterized that well. She was pissed off at that point. Everything clicked for her. So she was willing to do whatever it took after that to change not just the family dynamics, but writ large for society. How about how President Wilson's behavior and the whole thing? What was he? So that scene after the parade, what were they able to leverage out of that with all the publicity? What were they able to accomplish that brought them a little step forward? Carrie Cat thought it was a ridiculous idea. They got a seat at the table with the President of the United States of America. That's no small feat. How many of you guys have been able to sit down with the President of the United States of America? But what was his attitude?
He needs to learn more about it.
Yeah, he was totally patronizing them. Like, oh, I've never heard of this. Interesting. I've got bigger matters to attend to. Yeah, let me educate myself. And I'll get back to you, little ladies. But what's he end up doing towards the end of the film?
Advocating for them.
Advocating for what specifically?
Voting rights, equal rights.
Let's get specific here so we know what we watched and why this is important. What did they accomplish ultimately? The 19th Amendment. He was addressing Congress saying, hey guys, I think it's time for you guys in Congress to draft and pass the 19th Amendment so it can go to the states for ratification. How did he get to that? Because obviously that was low on his priority. He was a typical man for his time. He was a complete white supremacist too. Theodore Roosevelt had got African Americans in federal employment, lower levels and all of that, and bureaucrats. Wilson got in and fired every Black person and Hispanic person that previous administrators had hired. And he definitely had no patience for women's rights. But here he is in front of Congress now. Hey, 19th Amendment, Congress, pass this. How did he get to that point?
He made him look wrong with the little note, the senator guy.
Yeah, right. Again, when I paused yesterday, the whole point of an activist is to put yourself in a position of suffering, to get the sympathy of other people who might not even care about your cause. They might even be hostile to your cause. But you see people getting hurt and going, yeah, I don't really care about women's rights, but that shouldn't be happening to them. They're force feeding them? Why are they force feeding them? Why are they willing to starve to death? Yeah, I guess it's not such a big deal if they want to vote. Why does that matter? That's the whole thing. And so, yeah, he's completely embarrassed by this. It's on him. He's worried about getting reelected or not. He's in his second term here, but he's worried about, he's a Democrat. And so might this be one more damn thing that might lead the Republicans to get into office? And my legacy will be destroyed by my rival party. You know, those are the calculations of somebody in office. And so this is something to be really aware of, because we often get cynical about politicians. Oh, they're just self-serving. They don't really care. Yeah, that's true. Typically, a politician is amoral. They're interested in power. And so what we need to appreciate about the leadership of someone like Alice Paul is they leverage that. I'm going to get him to care. Obviously, he doesn't care. That was an interesting thing she said to Emily Layton when they first met, and she was like saying, "Hey, what can I do here?" And then she was pressing her, and she's like, "Oh, my husband's a senator. He doesn't approve." And what she said is, "Well, if everybody approved, then we wouldn't be doing anything here. What would be the point? Obviously, people don't approve. That's why we're doing all of this." Right. To that end, I want to show something fast forwarding to the civil rights era, because it's the same kind of template that happened in the civil rights era. And here we go. So this is Lyndon Baines Johnson. He's very well known for passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in particular. It got rid of poll taxes, literacy tests, for states that had a historic behaviors of making it difficult of people who are not white to vote. If they wanted to change any of their voting laws, they had to submit those now with the Voting Rights Act to the Department of Justice for approval. That actually just got dismantled recently by the Supreme Court. But going back to here, this was hugely consequential, and it resulted in people who are not white voting en masse. And finally, going back all the way to Reconstruction, finally getting people in their community to run for and to win political office so they could represent their communities, so they could make sure that people in their communities had things like healthy drinking water, right? Clean air, access to legitimate police enforcement rather than police being antagonistic to their communities. That's what's important about having somebody represent your interest in a community. So real lived consequences. So let's take a look at part of his speech and talk about how he got to this point. This is a good old boy from Texas.
Mr. Kennedy, can you tell me which speech it is so I can read a transcript of it?
Yeah, this is the, in fact, hold on a second. Let me put it, one sec. I'm going to put it in the chat. But this is the President Johnson's March 15th, 1965 voting rights speech in Congress. And I'll put the Google link in the chat for y'all. And then I don't know what the quality is going to be like, but I'll share it with you as we're watching. So here we go.
Not be over. What happened in Selma is part of a far larger movement which reaches into every section and state of America. It is the effort of American Negroes to secure for themselves the full blessings of American life. Their cause must be our cause too. Because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome. As a man whose roots go deeply into Southern soil, I know how agonizing racial feelings are. I know how difficult it is to reshape the attitudes and the structure of our society. But a century has passed, more than 100 years, since the Negro was freed. And he is not fully freed tonight. It was more than 100 years ago that Abraham Lincoln, a great president of another party, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. But emancipation is a proclamation and not a fact. A century has passed, more than 100 years, since equality was promised. And yet the Negro is not equal. A century has passed since the day of promise, and the promise is unkept. The time of justice has now come. And I tell you that I believe sincerely that no force can hold it back. It is right in the eyes of man and God that it should come. And when it does, I think that day will brighten the lives of every American. For Negroes are not the only victims. How many white children have gone uneducated? How many white families have lived in stark poverty? How many white lives have been scarred by fear because we've wasted our energy and our substance to maintain the barriers of hatred and terror? And so I say to all of you here and to all in the nation tonight, that those who appeal to you to hold on to the past do so at the cost of denying you your future. This great, rich, restless country can offer opportunity and education and hope to all black and white, all north and south, sharecropper and city dweller. These are the enemies. Poverty, ignorance, disease, they are enemies, not our fellow man, not our neighbor. And these enemies too, poverty, disease, and ignorance, we shall overcome. There is no constitutional issue here. The command
How do you think good old boy from Texas, Lyndon Baines Johnson, came to having to give a speech like that?
Because it was in his best political interest to do so.
Yeah, he got pushed into that. You had in 1963, right, Martin Luther King Jr. having 250,000 people on the lawn of DC between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Monument. He mentioned Selma. And understand what's going on here. What's part of the calculus for him is this is during the Cold War. What the Cold War was is basically not just a military conflict possibility between the Soviet Union and the United States. It's also a competition between two different societies saying, we've got the answers. Selma, if you don't, does anybody know what happened on Selma? The March on Selma?
The march. Oh.
Hope I lost you if you're talking. It was a civil rights march where on live TV, they're marching across a bridge and police officers are beating the hell out of them with clubs, sicking dogs on them, putting people in the hospital. And that's international news. And it's here is the United States saying that we are the beacon of liberty, we have democracy, we have God, and look at the Soviet Union. They don't have God, they're not a democracy, and it's on full display. Oh, you really have a democracy? So that's part of the calculus. Also, there's a woman named Fannie Lou Hamer from Mississippi, a sharecropper, who is invited to the Democratic convention, and she gives a talk, a speech, explaining how she got the crap beat out of her for just trying to vote. She talks about how she's been raped. She talks about how she got a forced hysterectomy, which was very common of women of color back then, both indigenous women and Black women.
She's
And
I'm sick and tired of being. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you.
She's
Yeah, say that quote.
I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
That's probably one of Fannie Lou Hamer's most famous quotes. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. So she's given that speech. This is prior to this speech. And Lyndon Baines Johnson doesn't want that going out. So he interrupts the live broadcast on the 3 networks back then to announce the 9-month anniversary of Kennedy's assassination, and said the investigation is still going on. And it was clear it was a ploy to shut her up. And he kept talking and talking until her talk that was being broadcasted was done. He got on live TV and overrode that. Well, back then we had a press that was committed to democracy. And after his speech for several weeks, they would play Fannie Lou Hamer's talk. And it was clear what Johnson had done, tried to shut her up. So this was politically embarrassing. So understand, he is doing this reluctantly. Still a great thing. But politicians are people of tremendous ego. And that's fine. That's just a thing. They want to be known in history. That's what usually motivates these people. I want to make it to the history books. He's made it to the history books. So people like Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Medgar Evers, Rosa Parks understand that. Alice Paul understood that. Politicians are they're this type of human animal. They like to be photographed. They like applauses. They've got really weak egos. And if you push them, you can help them. Perhaps, no guarantees, do the right thing. That's democracy. Democracy isn't just showing up and voting. It is looking around and going, how can I make this a better world for myself and for future generations? That's democracy. A government of the people. That's what literally democracy means. A beautiful story, Iron Jawed Angels, that is a template for what activists are all about. And you guys have the power to engage in that kind of mindset. And I don't think you need me to tell you that we are in a time where that mindset is sorely needed. There are problems in the society, dangerous problems. We have people in power of really ill intent. So, shifting gears, and before I shift gears, any other comments or just insight about the movie Iron Jawed Angels? Anything struck you? Questions?
I've heard that there's some like, oh, sorry, is someone else talking? I'm sorry.
Yeah, 1 second, Sophia. Yeah, go.
It gave me like a new perception because I personally like I would still vote, but I would be like, gosh, not vote, just vote. And then honestly, after yesterday, after watching the movie, it kind of changed my perception and how these women had to go through all of that for the new generation to be able to vote and have basic rights.
Yeah, great point. So we often hear, and total credence to combat vets who fought for our freedom, particularly like in World War II, World War I, right? But we never give credence to people like Alice Paul, Lucy Burns, and Nesma Halden. Those people were willing to die. Nesma Halden did die. She kept talking and giving speeches while she was gravely ill and died. Alice Paul was willing to die by starving herself to death. And so it is an opportunity at the very least to be a little bit self-reflective of not caring, being apathetic, being cynical. Being cynical is easy. Of course, people are crap and they do bad things. But it's a recognition that you have the power within you, an inner light within you to change that one person at a time, starting with yourself, your family, your community, perhaps the state, perhaps the nation, and who knows, maybe the entire world. Sophia, you had a comment.
I was just gonna comment still. I know you touched on it. I was having trouble muting myself when you were talking about that, but just the intersectionality of still the women's right movement today. And if you look at the Democratic Party and how, I mean, we're not doing so great right now, but a lot of that has historically still continued to be driven by Black women.
Yeah, absolutely.
And still
Right.
to see that this goes all the way back from the beginning of suffragette, that we're still struggling with that now.
Yeah, Black women represent one of the largest voting pools, people who actually show up to vote. Despite the fact that perhaps their interests and needs aren't being represented, they still show up to vote, organize, contribute. And they don't get a lot of airplay. There's countless nameless people out there that we have no idea what they're doing, but they're in their communities, trying to better their communities because they realize that their sons and daughters are in a terrible situation, and it's up to me to help with whatever, the food bank, showing up to city council, calling my senator, getting something done.
I think that this will resonate with you because of Brandy's lived experience and profession, but because of the administration's ban on DEI, they can't say the word Black in legislation or any official capacity having to do with the NIH or the CDC. So the leading cause of death in women in America is Black women dying of sepsis, which is an infection so bad that it's gotten so advanced that it's now in your bloodstream. And the second most cause of maternal, sorry, my kids are freaking out in the back, is Black women dying of preeclampsia, which is basically really complex, but essentially high blood pressure. But those are the two leading causes of women in America. But when the ACOG, which is the Association of Gynecologists, met this year to discuss the leading issues in gynecology, they couldn't bring up the top two things because they couldn't say Black.
Yeah. And everything she says also applies to Hispanic, Mexican American women who have,
For sure.
Just-
Yeah. We don't even get the recognition to say that we're not being recognized.
yeah, and that's a problem because if you can't talk about it in legislation, then you can't address it and fix these problems. And understand beyond the race dimension, what we're talking about is class. So this is the problem with race, is it obscures class issues because a lot of the issues that Sophia just brought up also apply to poor white women. If you don't have medical attention through the duration of your pregnancy, you can't just go to a doctor because it costs money, and you don't have insurance. These things that Sophia brought up have a tendency, and since Black women and Hispanic women, Mexican American women disproportionately represent the poor class, they are disproportionately represented to these challenges. Now we can't talk about it in Congress. And this is not new. In the 1830s, they had the gag rule. It was a Congress member, a senator could get arrested for bringing up the word slavery. That's just how kind of shallow some people in power are. What are you afraid of? If it's not an issue, then what does it matter if somebody brings it up? You could swat it away, but why wouldn't you want to address the health concerns of millions of women who are giving birth to the next generation? Why can't we talk about it? Are there things, how can we allocate funds to help these people? To get them perhaps free medical care while they're pregnant so they can have a healthy baby. Before we get to the next talk, students sometimes ask, how can I get informed? And that's a really difficult question to ask because the news media outlets are controlled by corporations and they're designed to be really repulsive. I don't actually blame anybody who says, I don't want to be informed, because you turn on CNN, CBS, Fox News, and what happens? You got people yelling at you, yelling at each other, calling each other's names. Who wants that smoke? You got enough smoke in your personal life. Why am I going to bring in that noise into my living room or into my earbuds? This media outlet based in YouTube is a place that I highly recommend to students that are interested in being informed about what's going on. It's called Breaking Points, and I'll explain why in just a second. Reason why I recommend this media outlet is the founders of it and the main host, that gentleman up there, Sagara Jetty, deeply conservative. The woman right there, and that's her actual name, Crystal Ball, she's progressive, very liberal. They're able to have conversations with each other. Sometimes they get heated, but they never, ever call each other's names or call people out in their audience who disagree with them names, like communists or fascists or you're stupid, right? You turn on the other networks and they just yell and scream at each other and talk over each other. There is a baked-in dignity to this media outlet. And what's very valuable about it, if you're liberal and you would tend to agree with her, you're going to hear, because sometimes he gets heated and excited, just like anybody, but he's able to present his point of view politically from a conservative point of view in a coherent way that's not emotionally deregulated. He's not trying to intimidate anybody. And there's plenty of opportunities. Someone from a liberal perspective going, I never considered that from a conservative perspective. And it doesn't mean that, I'm wrong. It means, there's a greater conversation to be had here. And so I can now understand, and maybe I do need to reconsider my views based on what he said. And the exact opposite, if you're conservative, you might hear something. This side those are both kind of leftists, and both of these people right here are conservative, right? So if you're conservative, you might hear something because it's being presented calmly, dignified. I never consider that. Now I kind of get that. And they have conversations with each other. And this guy right here, Ryan Grimm, most of these are just commentators. They commentate on the news, but he's an actual journalist, and he actually breaks stories and brings news to this network. So if you're interested in being informed, this is a good place to start, because yeah, just saying be informed, then okay, I'm being informed, but then you turn on CNN, ABC, Fox News, and it's just like, nope. Because I have a sense that that's intentional. They don't really want people paying attention. And whoever has the answers, conservatives, liberals, it's important to be engaged with these issues because the issues are ongoing. Okay.
Mr.
Any last-
Kennedy,
Yeah.
do you know about the group We the People?
No, not specifically, but let us know.
So there's a group, it's called We the People, and it's a coalition of local meetups where people from different political ideologies and social backgrounds and class meet up at places and communities and just have conversations, like literally at a Mexican restaurant or at a coffee shop. And there's a moderator, but they're not always super involved. They're just making sure that everyone remains civil, but where you can get with other people who have different ideas than you, so you're not in your echo chamber all the time, and really bouncing ideas off each other and truly coming from a place of empathy to say, you know, explain to me why you vote this way or why you support this, when maybe from my perspective it looks like you're voting against your interests. And really not just having, which is great, hearing different perspectives in media, but actually getting to know the person and building community and relationships despite that, because we can't work together if we can't build respect, and you can't have respect without empathy.
Is this group active locally here?
I'm not sure. I know that they're pretty active here in the Austin area, but I can look right now to see. In Austin, they meet up at a Mexican restaurant, but it's a nationwide thing. It's wethepeople.org.
If you could send me a link in pronto when you get a chance,
Yeah.
then I'll take a look at it and perhaps share it with my students. It would be.
Ezra.
That used to be the case. I lived that experience where I could talk to some at Thanksgiving, say, hey, I'm going to vote for this guy because of this. Oh, I'm not going to vote for him because of this. Cool. You pass the gravy. But now, yeah, you would be insane to bring up politics at Thanksgiving. And I think, yeah, it has a lot to do with our media outlets that make it really toxic and whatever political perspective, and make them out to be demons. And then if you understand who actually owns the corporations, these are people with lots of money who have their own political perspectives and interests, and have an interest and a loud voice to maintain those. So yeah, thanks for that. That sounds very interesting. It would be cool to have one of those in the RGV. So we could one day just talk to people that we have a tendency to disagree with. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. We're getting into the 1920s. A return to normalcy. So we've had the Industrial Revolution. Not good for workers, not good for consumers. And then we have the Progressive Era, where we have sometimes some tweaks around the edges to help workers and consumers alike. Sometimes some real significant changes, like the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So you have at least some guarantee that you're not eating rat meat when you have purchased hamburger, right? Or rat feces, those kinds of things. And then we get in the 1920s, and there is a backlash against that. And we're going to return to laissez-faire economics. This is what this means. So return to normalcy is a quote of this gentleman right here, President Harding, who basically says, yeah, we're going to return to normalcy, which is the politics of the Industrial Revolution. And so briefly, this is also, we're not going to touch specifically, but the culture of America is changing. 1920s is a very interesting time because it's the beginning of what we consider normal today. It's anything but normal. But this is when The 1920s marked the first time the demographics have shifted. There's more people living in cities now than in rural and agricultural areas. That's significant. One of the things that comes out of that is the phenomena of anonymity. I mean, we live in a small city, and yeah, it's not unusual to see somebody you know here, but it's not also unusual to walk all day long in the grocery store, taking a walk, and it's not seeing anybody you know, let alone living in Austin, New York City, Chicago, walking all day long and not seeing anybody you know. That is going to really change the whole face of what it means to be human. Think about being a young person living in an agricultural rural area. How do you get a job? Well, everybody knows your business. They know what you're good for, what you're not good for. And so some guy who owns, I don't know, a blacksmith shop in his backyard. Hey, your old man says you need a job. Why don't you come on by tomorrow? See how you do, see how you like it. It's good money, man. That's how you got a job back then. In cities, you get this a new phenomena of anonymity. Image becomes important. Strong handshake, looking someone straight in the eye, making sure you got the right clothes on, right? And so it really becomes ego-based. The music is changing. So jazz is becoming quite popular. This is quite interesting, jazz. What types of musicians typically perform jazz, especially back then?
Black people.
Black people. It's not a coincidence that the second wave of KKK rises also in the 1920s. There's lots of reasons for that, but this is part of it, because who do you think were the main commercial consumers of jazz? People who bought the records.
Also black people.
No, they're hurting, so they're not spending their money too much on records. Yeah, particularly white young women and men, but that's a concern. White women are going to these jazz clubs and having a real good time. And if you think that grandma or great-great-grandma and grandpa weren't partying, drinking, doing cocaine, it's called the Roaring 20s for a reason. And this music you listen to this music today, you're like, what's going on here? Right? This music for the time is down and it's dirty, it's suggestive, sexually suggestive. And so that's a problem, right? So you're seeing a lot more skin. That's a stark difference from the Victorian age, where women were covered literally from their neck all the way down. Woo, I'm seeing women's ankles now, right? People partying, listening to jazz, right? In the speakeasies, doing dances like the jitterbug, which is literally named after being high on cocaine. You get the jitters, the jitterbug. Right. A lot of skin there. So things are changing, right? Young people particularly have a lot of self-expression during the 1920s. Early 1920s, people are making money. People in the professional trades. It looks like good times are here to last. The concept of conspicuous consumption begins to arise, right? So this beautiful car here with a beautiful woman in front of it, right? This becomes the point of life. What's the point of having a car? What's the point of having an automobile? Why do you have a car?
To have sex in your backseat in the back row.
Definitely in that, yeah. But yeah, really the point of having a car is to get to point A to point B, to get to work, to get to school, to maybe go somewhere to have fun. This is extra, right? If you have this car, you can advertise to people, look at me, I made it. Look at the hoopty you're driving, the thing that you got to crank to get it started still. If you don't have enough money as me, I get to have a beautiful woman perched on my car. What do you got going on? It's the beginning of that. This image-oriented thing, very ego-based kind of culture is emerging. Women smoking in public, that's a political statement, right? 20 years prior, this would have been a controversy. women are doing this. So there's this mixed in with this, though, there's also this conservative reaction. What is happening to our young people? Women are showing skin, women are smoking, women are taking drugs, women are hanging out with black men. A lot of the civil rights movement, yes, we give, and rightfully so, credence to the activists involved, but underpinning that, especially when we get to rock and roll, which jazz, rock and roll, jazz basically develops. Rock and roll is basically a mixture of jazz and blues, black music. Do you literally know what rock and roll means? Think about it. And think about, especially in the 1950s, you ain't nothing but a hound dog, you shook me.
They're innuendos.
Oh, yeah, rock and roll. That, what we would say today, hooking up. So young people back in the day would say, hey, do you want to rock and roll? Instead of hook up, Netflix and chill. Rock. So when rock and roll comes on the scene, and rock and roll was around for 10, 15 years before white community got aware of it. The juke joints in the South. You want to just Google early blues. It's very suggestive. It is nasty music, very sexually suggestive music. And so what Elvis did, for instance, he put a white face, dance. That was very controversial. All that hip shaking and all of that. People were like, what the hell's going on? But it's not just him. People like Chuck Berry are becoming commercially viable. Chuck Berry, an African-American musician who's showing up to these shows, both young black and white people showing up. They would have, like nylon dividers. Black people dance over here. Hispanic people dance over here. White people dance over here. Well, the music starts kicking, that backbeat of rock and roll. Those things came down, and these people are dancing together. Young people are getting to know each other, having some fun, and looking at their parents going, what are you guys so uptight about? Right? This is fun. Okay. So I just wanted to touch on that because we're not really touching on the cultural inputs of the 1920s in the lecture. We're looking at the political landscape of the 1920s. So we'll be taking a look at the, and during the 1920s, we're focusing on the Republican Party in this thing. This is not so much a problem because the Republicans are in charge, and we'll talk about why the Republicans are in charge in just a second, but this is always a problem. If it was just the Democrats in charge, or just the Republicans in charge, or just one party in charge, well, now other voices aren't in the table, and you create political echo chambers and affirmations and reaffirmations of what we're doing is correct, despite what's actually happening on the ground, right? We'll compare 1921 to 1933 with the Industrial Revolution very briefly. The internal and external tax structures of this time period. Explain specific ways 1921 and through 1933 domestic program led to the collapse of the economy, the Great Depression. And we'll examine the last president of the 1920s before FDR takes power, Herbert Hoover's response, because when he becomes president, that's when the Great Depression happens. So we'll look at his response. So these are the three presidents at the time of the 1920s, starting with Harding, Coolidge, and then Hoover at this time. So prior to these presidents, you got this guy right here. Take a look at his teeth. What's going on with that grill?
He's British?
Look at his teeth closely. He's American. Yeah, dirty, gross. That wouldn't be unusual back then. You think he could get elected today with a grill like that? That's just dirty teeth. It's what happens if you don't have a dentist and you don't care. It's very instructive. That wouldn't be uncommon, right? He's got crooked teeth. There's spaces in them. He could be the best politician ever, have all these great policies. He opens up his mouth today. No way he's getting elected. This is the 19-teens, the 1920s. a lot of the stuff that we consider normal. We got photographs now, movies, radio, right? There is more of a sense of image is important at this time, right? This is just what happens when you get older, right? You don't have, every 6 months I go get my teeth cleaned. If I didn't go to the dentist every 6 months to get my teeth cleaned, if every time I smiled, you guys would be like, put that away, please, right? Well, he's got a lot of problems, but yeah, he did a lot of reforms. He is considered, there's 3 presidents during the progressive era. You've got Roosevelt, you've got Taft, and then you've got Wilson. Both Roosevelt and Taft were Republicans, right? And he's a Democrat. During this time period, there is a bipartisan effort. They have different approaches, different solutions. They disagree with each other on the approaches, but everybody in the 19 teens from 1901 to 1917, representatives, senators, presidents, governors, state assembly members, is we've got to do something to regulate industry so it's not just running roughshod on consumers and the working class and creating hellscapes in our urban areas. Well, you remember in Iron Jawed Angels, what was we came into the beginning of that film when during the parade, that was his first term, his inaugural address, right? So 1912 to 1916, troubles brewing in Europe. World War I is beginning. And did you catch what so then he's going to run again in 1916. What was his political campaign promising the American people?
No wars.
I'm not going to get us involved in the European war. You vote for me again, no way in hell are we getting involved in that war. So he gets elected, and then what happens? We get involved. So typical politician, he breaks a huge promise, right? That's a big promise to break. That's not just, hey, I said I was going to raise taxes. No, young men are going to die and have horrific experiences over there. Now, to give grace to him, why this is happening, and to also give us a greater understanding of why the progressive era was so important, is the reason why he had to break that promise is the federal government, through the Industrial Revolution, through much of the progressive era, has no way of regulating the banking industry. Today they do. We hear a lot of criticism of the Federal Reserve, and a lot of that criticism is warranted, but they have control over the entire banking industry by virtue of they set the interest rates. So if the economy is hot and heavy, inflation's going up, they could raise the interest. If the economy is starting to go down, they could lower the interest to stimulate growth. Well, what's going on as Europe, like particularly England and France, are at war with Germany, is American banks are lending recklessly to those governments for their war machine. And this, it's known to be a problem because what happens if they can't pay them back? Those banks go out of business. And you understand why banks are important despite how problematic banks are and how much we love to hate them. But what service do they provide us?
Hold on to your money.
That's the least of what they do. But yeah, they hold on to your money so you can manage your money a little instead of putting your money under a mattress where somebody could take it or steal it or you lose track of it. It's easy to spend money. But what else do they do? Well, how does it keep it circulating?
No.
They
Loans. How many of you guys have $30,000 in your pocket to buy a brand new truck? Where do you go if you want a brand new truck or a home? You go to a bank and they go, cool, here's your money. Try to pay it back in 5 years. We're going to get interest on this. So it's a win-win situation. You get a new thing, a home, a car. That keeps the economy rolling. If banks writ large go out of business, the economy comes to a halt. And so, yeah, American banks have over leveraged themselves by just lending, the equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars today to mainly England and France. And now that he's been elected for a second term, it looks like Germany's going to win this war. And Germany has aims of taking over all of Europe and North Africa. What's going to happen to all his loans? So he was kind of put in a really difficult position. It was stupid for him probably to say, but he's a politician who wants to get elected. I'll keep us out of the war. He knew this was going on. what the federal, he's responsible for the Federal Reserve. Lots of problem with the Federal Reserve, but it was the first time that there's a central authority that, you know, banks can lend whoever they want today, but if they're lending recklessly, the Federal Reserve can go, okay, we're raising interest rates to curtail this reckless lending that's going on, right? That was just going into effect as the United States was getting involved in World War I. But what he says here is every reform of the progressive era is what he's referring to there will be lost when we go into war, because the focus will be on winning that war, and there'll be lots of money coming into the federal government to fund the war machine, and people get focused on the war. And even him himself, one of the terrible things about this president is World War I was not popular. It was kind of equivalent to the Vietnam War. A lot of Americans spoke out against it. They protested. Do not join the draft. This is a banker's war. It literally was a banker's war. And so they passed the Sedition Act, where if you spoke out against the draft, the war, spoke out against the United States of America, you can get sentenced to 20 years in prison and a $20,000 fine. $20,000 back in their money back then. So I don't know how much that would be today, hundreds of thousands of dollars today. That tends to happen during war, because if he's taking his country to war, what is his main objective?
Winning
To
the
win.
war.
And to win it as soon as possible. The last thing a president needs is a war to be politicized. So this, you also see during World War I a very robust, aggressive propaganda machine. Uncle Sam, you've all seen it. I want you. That was all part of this time period, right? A lot of propaganda attacking men's masculinity. Are you a man? Then why are you not registering for the draft? That kind of a thing. And that worked to a certain extent, but not enough. There's still dissent. So that's when we see these laws. That tends to happen during war. That's why we should be very careful about getting involved in wars. Abraham Lincoln, considered one of the greatest presidents in the United States, violates the Constitution all over the place in service of winning the Civil War. He literally took people's habeas corpus rights away. Habeas corpus is a very important legal term to know. It literally means show me the body. That means show me the body of evidence. So you arrested this guy, cops, DA, judge, show me the body of evidence that demonstrates his guilt. People during the Civil War spoke out against the war. Abraham Lincoln, you're just getting people killed needlessly. He had those people just put in a cage. You're just, shut up. I don't want to hear it. Right? He needs to win the war. This, World War II. Millions of Japanese Americans were rounded up and put into concentration camps. Their wealth was confiscated. During the Vietnam War, you had COINTELPRO, where activists were spied on by the FBI. The FBI was quite brutal to Black Panthers, to civil rights activists, to Vietnam War activists. War on Terror with the Patriot Act, right? You have no expectation of privacy if you own one of these things. The National Security Agency could literally turn on every one of your devices without you even knowing it to see what you're talking about. Turn on your camera without even knowing that it's on, see what's going on in your room. During times of war, people get scared, and it's unfortunate, but we are more apt during war to go, here's our freedoms, keep us safe, our dear leaders. So he's referring to that. And there was a lot of gains during the progressive era. And he's like, yeah, a lot of that's going to be lost. During the war, after the war, the Democratic Party becomes divided because of his broken campaign promise. Powerful Democrats are furious with him. And so now they're fighting. And this is why the Republicans are going to jump in the 1920s and clean house. They're going to control the Senate. They're going to control the House. And they're going to win all three presidencies during the 1920s. It's not that they are Republicans or Republicans are bad and caused the Great Depression, but there are no Democrats going, hey, yeah, maybe raising tariffs is a bad idea. Maybe lowering tax rates for the wealthy is a bad idea because of this. So there's no argument within the halls of Congress. They're just passing laws and thinking that this is going to stimulate the economy. So let's take a look at that. So just real quick, both eras, the Gilded Age, late 1800s, what we studied before, and the 1920s. They're both going to be very business friendly. You got regulators now. Federal government has passed laws looking at food, looking at drugs, looking at monopolies. Republican administration are going to hire those regulators to be very business friendly and look the other way during this time period. Rapid industrialization is happening, so a lot of wealth is developing. And then, just like the Gilded Industrial Age, a very acute, uneven distribution of wealth develops. And that's going to be kind of the foundation of the Great Depression. So, what we're going to be taking a look at going forward is, laissez-faire and trickle-down economics, the internal tax structure, so tax breaks for the wealthy, external tax structures, tariffs, which has been in the news recently, which we'll talk about that. But this is trickle-down economics versus grassroots or Keynesian economics, this graph. So what trickle-down economics is the government, and it's not necessarily bad, it's not necessarily good, it's just a tool. Government gives support to wealthy individuals or big business in the form of tax breaks, sometimes subsidies. Here's some money. How it can be a tool is, our nation is void of an industry, whether it's AI or solar panels. And so China is outperforming us. So it might make sense to go, hey, you guys are producing these things in Austin. Here's some tax breaks. And how a healthy way of doing it is you get these tax breaks for 5 years, get your books in order because they're not going to last. And the idea here is you get tax breaks and that industry takes that windfall, either tax breaks or subsidies, invests in their industry, then you can hire people. And those people now have money in their pocket. It stimulates business. They take that money and they buy, they go to restaurants, they go to clothing stores, they buy trucks, whatever. This creates more profits. And theoretically, the government can recoup the debt that they went into because there's more of a tax base that they can tax people with. Right? There's just more money to tax. You could probably even lower taxes because there's more money in the pool to pay off that original debt, theoretically. The opposite of this is called Keynesian economics, which becomes popular in the 1930s under New Deal. Keynesian, it's named after a guy named Albert Keynes. He's an English economist. And so the main problem of the 1930s that pushes back against the pervasive argument that in an economic downturn, the market can self-correct. And what they mean by that is, and sometimes that's true. So the economy crashes. Well, what happens to the price of land or machinery or whatever a capitalist might need to further expand their business when the economy crashes? What's that? Yeah, they go down, right? And so when you hear people say, oh, the economy's crashing, the government shouldn't get involved, don't worry. Yeah, it's going to be rough for a couple of years, but prices are going down. That means people who have got some capital who are interested in making money in the future can buy up some stuff. And then and that in itself will stimulate the economy. They're purchasing stuff. They're purchasing land, warehouses, factories, the machinery for their factories, putting people to work. And then after a couple of years, the economy comes back. The problem with the 1930s is that ain't happening, man, because you got 25% unemployment. You got people with money with the stock market crashing going, I'm not going to invest in this economy. I'm not going to open up a new factory right now. Everybody's out of work. The stocks I had last year are worthless right now. So what Albert Keynes argued is, the government should go into debt. And instead of giving money directly to wealthy individuals and big business, give it directly to rank and file Americans. Give them checks. We saw this during the pandemic. American families got $250, $350 per child. There were stimulus checks of $1,200. And within a year, childhood poverty was reduced by 50%. So it had real results. Because what do people do if you get a check from the government? You don't put it in the bank. You don't put it in under your mattress. You pay off debt perhaps. Maybe You say, you know what, we got some extra money. Let's go out to eat. Honey, you've been looking kind of drabby these years. Go buy yourself some new clothes, right? We got a little extra money from the government. It stimulates the economy, right? So those are kind of two different approaches. They're tools. The problem with these approaches, either way, is when they become ideological. Trickle-down economics always works. It should always work. Let's always do that. Keynesian economics always works. And then you typically get political parties that gravitate to it, and it becomes part of their platform. So typically, not always, but Republicans, trickle-down economics. Typically, not always, Democrats, Keynesian economics. That's a problem because it's not addressing issues on the ground. Maybe trickle-down economics works in some cases where a Democrat could say trickle-down economics for this industry, Keynesian economics for this community over here, that kind of a thing. So this is setting up talking about the external tax credits. Let me come back to this because I'm jumping ahead. Let's talk about this first. So this is all trickle-down economics, what you're seeing right here. So the Revenue Act, 1921, eliminated the wartime excess profits taxes. And pay attention to this word right here. Reduce the maximum marginal tax rates from 65% to 50%. What does marginal tax rates mean? That's really important to understand. It literally means what the word is saying, taxes on the margin. So that's important to understand because when this issue comes up, maybe we should lower taxes for the rich or raise tax, especially raising taxes for the rich. And a politician who doesn't want taxes raised on the rich will go, the rich are paying 65% of their income or wealth to the government. That is wrong. I don't care what you think about the rich. That's theft. That's not what a marginal tax rate is. Marginal tax rate is, let's just throw out a number. You make $1 million and 1 cent. Anything above $1 million and 1 cent will be taxed at 65%. Below that, you might get taxed at 40% to maybe 800,000, and below 800,000, it's on the margin of your income. Why would they do that? And you begin seeing this happen during the progressive era. Well, what was wrong with the Industrial Revolution? You had people making so much money, they were buying up newspapers, they were buying up entire industries. Democracy and capitalism, if it's not looked at as an integrated system, they don't mix. Uneven wealth distributions are the greatest threat to democracy because, yeah, you can have a few wealthy individuals buy all of the media, buy politicians, get their narrative out there, by their politicians. So one, this is a way of curtailing, not taking away wealth, not saying there could be no more wealthy people. This isn't communism, but saying, yeah, man, you can't make so much money that you can buy all of the press, all of the industry, and all of the politicians. There has to be some sort of leveling field here. Also, it's a way of generating income for infrastructure that helps the wealthy class. The wealthy class needs roads to get their products to and fro. They need a strong military to protect their products overseas, right? Or threats looming across overseas. They also need healthy, viable workers, right? So you need workers who are educated. You need workers that are healthy. So you do need money. The government needs money to spend things like on education and healthcare. That's a way of generating income. Well, they're going to continue to lower the marginal tax rate. Make sure you understand that word, right? Because you're going to hear this word if you pay attention to politics. In 1924, now it's to 40%. By 1926, it's lowered to 20%. What is the result? In part, by 1929, 5% of the population receives 1/3 of all personal income. That's an unsustainable economic system. That means most people don't have money in their pocket to buy the things that these people are producing. This is where, in part, we're going to see the Great Depression. See what's going on here? 91% in 1951. Why do you think that was the case? That was the case beginning in 1941 and would continue through the early Cold War. Huge marginal tax rates. Again, not 91% of somebody's millions and millions of dollars, but if they made over $5 million, anything over what I'm just throwing out a number there, anything over $5 million would be taxed at 91%. Why do you think such a large marginal tax rate was needed? To fund the war, to fund World War II. And what do we jump immediately into after World War II? The Cold War. And it wasn't controversial. Wealthy people were like, yeah, I got enough money. I mean, I'm sure wealthy people some were really pissed off about this, but there was more of a social contract. Like, yeah, we're protecting ourselves. I've got the money. You know, after so much money, man, there is a point of diminishing returns, right? If you could buy any Learjet you want, any yacht you want, what does it matter if you're making another $1 million? I'm sure that hurts, maybe your ego, but this has been the case before. Marginal tax rates have been lowered in recent years, I think all the way down to 28%, right? It is in part why we today have a acute maldistribution of wealth, one of the reasons. Okay, so let's go back to this slide. They were out of order. This is from the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. The Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. What is that referring to, especially the foreign nations?
Other countries.
Yeah, what are they specifically referring to? What does the Congress have the power? What do you think commerce is pointing to? What do you think they can do to regulate commerce? Think about taxes. Tariffs. Now, tariffs have been politicized. That's bad because tariffs can be just like trickle-down economics or Kinsey. It's a tool. And for the first half of our nation's history, we had high tariffs because we were a developing nation. Our current president, what he has done and why this is in part controversial is through executive order, he raised these retributive tariffs without Congress. The Supreme Court has shut all of these down, but a lot of damage was done. It was illegal what he did. It was objectively, the courts ruled it was illegal. It's supposed to be the Congress. Why should it be the Congress and not one person, the President of the United States, to raise tariffs on other countries?
Because it can turn into like a dictatorship because it's like one person can do it, but it's to say that other people can't do it.
Yeah, that's the biggest spectrum. It could be used in a very authoritarian way, but even less extreme than that, but that's certainly a concern. If one person is deciding, what could he possibly be in that decision? Well, he could be a narcissist, but he could be wrong. The reason why the founding fathers in the Constitution gave this power to the Congress is they're representing people all over the country. Hey, if we raise tariffs on African countries and in South American countries, I'm a representative here from South Dakota. That's going to our biggest markets are South America. They're buying all our soybeans. If you raise tariffs on them, they're not going to buy our soybeans. And one of the results of these tariffs that were raised is it's destroyed the farming industry in the Midwest. There wasn't a body of people who were like, hey, I get why you might want to raise tariffs, but you're not considering the people I represent. That's what
like all the soybean farmers, and then they use the soy boy as a insult for the left, but then they literally hurt the soybean farmers.
Yeah, they destroyed the Chinese market for our soybean farmers. China said, well, screw it. We'll go elsewhere to buy our soybeans. Been doing business with you for 30 years, but no longer. They completely lost the entire Chinese market because one person decided. And then the other problem with raising tariffs like this is what do other countries do?
Use their own.
They follow suit and they take like a political and financial revenge on us.
And it's not good for anybody. Everybody's hurting in this world, right? But yeah, if the United States is raising tariffs, just not like, okay, yeah, we're having problems. We're having a trade deficit with this country, so we're going to raise our no, we're just going to raise our tariffs 60% on every country or 20% on every country. Well, every other country is going to go, well, and that means stuff that's produced here that would normally go there, people in those countries aren't buying it. And the other problem with raising tariffs is, yeah, this is not a tax on other countries. It's literally a tax on the distributor. So the first point of a tariff, it's if I'm going to a factory in Mexico to bring products to the United States, they're the first person that pays that tariff because I'm bringing products into this country from Mexico. And then I sell these products to Walmart or Target, and Target goes, oh, shoot, this is more expensive because you had to pay a higher tariff. And then where does the cost go?
To the customer.
To the customer. So it's again, tariffs by themselves aren't a bad thing. This country had high tariffs because we were still industrializing. Where he was inspired by was President McKinley. McKinley, when he was in Congress, was all for raising tariffs high, keeping tariffs high. And then he became president. And he realized, oh, things have changed. We have this huge industrial base, and we're producing all these products. And Americans aren't able to buy all of these products. And if we're not able to sell American-made products to England, to France, to South America, to China, then these industries are going to collapse and people are going to get laid off. And so when he became president, that's when the United States started lowering its tariffs significantly down to 3 to 5%. Because the situation on the ground changed. We were no longer a developing nation. We were one of the wealthiest nations on the planet by the time we got to the early 20th century when McKinley became president. So this is what begins to happen. Yeah, sorry. So the war protected American business and allowed new industries to develop, right? And it was a big windfall for American industry. The federal government needs a war machine, and that would be a big windfall. We're used to thinking, okay, we have this really strong military. That wasn't the case during World War I. Since George Washington, we get into a war. After the war, greatly descaled the military. And that would continue until we get to World War II. That was on the advice of George Washington, which is weird. You think about who George Washington was. He was a military man. He was president of the United States. Imagine a president of the United States telling Congress, slash military spending to a skeleton. He's going to lose today if he says something like that. Why would he do that? Why would future presidents do that? Especially think about the early republic. These people are very committed to representative government, not so much democracy, but representative government where people have rights. This is revolutionary stuff. What could happen if you have a very strong military to your rights and your representative government? You have men with guns, very powerful weapons.
They can take over society, and that's where the Second Amendment was intended to be, to protect ourselves against the military. But I mean, even now, if we carry even the most powerful gun, we're not going to stand a chance against the drones. And
but going back to their time, that was the basis of the Second Amendment. People in power have a tendency to love power, to want more power. And if you're a general with a couple of regiments behind you and they all love you and the politicians are screwing up, and this is what happened in Rome. Caesar looked at the Republic, which was a mess back then. There was all sorts of corruption. And he took over the government with his legions and ruined the Roman Republic. The founding fathers were students of history. So yeah, after a war, you descale the military. So yeah, business is booming because we need a giant war machine. So industries that produce weapons, uniforms, textiles, food, they're all making lots of money. And they asked for tariff protection in the 1920s to maintain that. Because yeah, after the war, following that tradition, the US government said, let's cut all of this military spending. And so business is going to Congress and saying, hey, can we raise tariffs? Because we're starting to lose money. And they can make the argument that this is going to lead to lost jobs and all of that kind of stuff. So after 1917, the United States, for the first time, becomes a creditor nation. This goes back to the problem we were talking about with Wilson. Banks have over-leveraged their lending. We're lending more money out than we're borrowing in the banking industry, is what's happening. This is becoming a problem. So after World War I, the war is over, after 1917, to pay back US loans, and Europe is a mess. Their economy is complete shatters after World War I. And they have a huge debt to US banks. So what can they do? Well, they can increase their exports to the United States, but they don't have an industrial base anymore. A lot of it's been destroyed, so that's going to be a problem. They could reduce their imports from the United States to protect their own markets. But the United States has a booming economy, so the United States is flooding Europe with their products, so that's a problem. This is one of the things that they're going to do to help get out of debt, and this is one of the big causes of World War II. Germany, as a result of World War I, is going to get 100% of the blame. It is one of the biggest failures in diplomacy, in diplomatic history. And when the economy starts to take a downturn in the mid-1920s, that wasn't just in the United States, it's global. Germany is having to pay back war reparations, and it's making problems going from worse to cataclysmic for Germany. Why does it lead to World War II? Well, this is the problem when you have a downturned economy. Democracy will always take a peripheral attention to the public. I don't care about democracy right now. Then you have somebody who rises to power, like Hitler, saying, vote for me, and he got democratically elected, and I will make Germany great again. And he did for a little while, by taking away a lot of people's rights and whatnot, creating a fascist state. So that's one thing that they were doing. Take out new loans. Well, that's problematic. They're already over leveraged. That's not going to help them. Here's what they are beginning to do. We can't pay back loans, American banks. That's a problem. That's a problem. So, in a way of generating revenue for the federal government and for somewhat punishing other countries and to maintain those high profits from World War I, what we see in 1922 is something just outrageous, a 400% custom tax. It immediately launches a international tariff war amongst countries. The United States is issuing up to 400% in certain commodities and goods. So other countries are following suit. So nobody's buying anything from anybody in the 1920s. What is the problem with high tariffs? So what high tariffs do is the equivalent of going to the gym and eating a bunch of Reese's peanut butter cups. And then maybe for about a half an hour, you're able to pump a lot. You got this big sugar rush, but after half an hour, you're just like, oh, dude, I shouldn't have eaten all those peanut butter cups. That's what tariffs kind of do for industry. It creates inefficient production, lower wages, artificial products, artificial faith in the economy, and speculation. How does it do all of that? Well, yeah, if you're raising tariffs on other countries, then it does protect, that's the whole point of a tariff. It protects industry in the United States. And so Americans are going to work. This is the early 20s. People are getting jobs, good paying jobs. And Americans are consuming American goods. That's the whole point of these tariffs. But what's since we don't really have in the 1920s economists who are collecting data, that doesn't happen until the 1930s, and reporting to the president going, yeah, but industry is having artificial faith in the economy, and they're opening up more factories, they're opening up more warehouses, they're employing more people, they're producing more goods than the American consumer can purchase, and European countries aren't buying our stuff anymore. So by the time we get to the mid-1920s, this is becoming a problem. But in the early 1920s, yeah, high tariffs, Americans are working, roaring 20s, jazz clubs, radios, vacuum cleaners, people are buying all of this stuff. Cool. Well, I'll open up another factory. I'll open up another warehouse. I'll keep producing. So inefficient production because there's not going to be enough American consumers to buy that stuff. And then, yeah, if you don't have other companies like we have today, like Toyota, that's like based in Alabama or Mississippi, along with Ford and Chevy. So if the amount of employers within any given industry is limiting, well, then that industry can go, oh, you want to work for me? And slowly they're beginning to lower wages because there's less opportunities for employment because other countries aren't setting up shop here to employ our workers, right? So yeah, there's an artificial faith in the economy, and then gross speculation. In early 20s, people in industry are making money in the stock market. They're making money in their industries. So they're buying up more stocks. They're buying up more land. And when that, especially when you buy up land, this is happening today. I bought my house I didn't buy it, I mortgaged it for $160,000. It is now worth $280,000. We bought right in time. I got an extraordinarily, I won't even say it, but it is a very cheap mortgage. You can't do that anymore in the Valley. Part of what explains that is legislation has been passed in the last 20 years to give investment firms the ability to buy up multiple single homes. So what's been happening in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years is normally when you go to buy a house, the house is worth $200,000. And you say to the seller, we'll do 180. And then they say, no, how about 185? Cool, deal, right? Well, if you are an investment firm, a bank, or just a very rich person, and you're thinking what an investment would be to buy up all these single homes so I can rent them and wait for property values to go up and then I can sell this, 10, 15 years down the road. They're just coming in and going, oh, you want $300,000 for this house? Here you go. And I want that house too, and I want that house too, and I want that house too. That's what's happening today.
My husband and I tried to buy a house in the Valley 4 or 5, maybe 4 years ago when we still live there. And we made 4 different offers on 4 different houses, and we got beat out by the cash price, like $50,000 every time. Cash price above asking from big corporations who are buying up all the houses in the old North McAllen area.
That's happening all over the country right now. That's a big part of why housing prices are going up, right? And that's not an accident, or that's not just what happens. That is due to legislation passed by Congress to allow that to happen. It used to be you could only own so many properties, single home families in any given area. They deregulated all of that. Lease speculation, it raises prices for people who actually need homes to live in, to accumulate their own wealth. Because that's the main reason why you buy a home. It's like for us, we're very fortunate. We've made over in equity about $150,000. So if we sold our home today, we would have $150,000 in our pocket. Not a lot of money, but that's maybe 10 years from now, it might be even more. You guys, since you're young and still trying to get into the professional trades, unless legislation is changed, it's going to be every year that goes by, as long as this continues, very difficult to buy a home because they're going to keep going up as long as that's allowed. And that's what was kind of going on back then. 1930, you had the Hawley-Smoot tariff, 1930. And by then, economists have data in universities and going, do not sign this, Mr. President, and he's going to sign it. And by 1932, you have a total of 25 countries antagonizing each other's with a tariff war. This is also part of why World War II is going to happen, because everybody is in this frustrated position. Countries are losing wealth. Individuals and countries are losing wealth. And so it's causing a lot of problems. As a result, between 1929 and 1932, foreign trade dropped from $9 billion to $3 billion. That means people like you are losing your jobs. People like you are losing your homes. This is 1929 is when the Great Depression started. 1932, the Depression. It's beginning to realize that, oh, the market is not going to correct this because of this loss of revenue. So looking at the structural weaknesses that were developed in the 1920s, we got these 6 things. Let's look at them in kind. Unequal distribution of wealth. Going on in the 1920s. This is the bedrock of the problem here. 65% of Americans earn less than $2,000 a year. Adjusted for inflation today, 65% of Americans are earning $26,000, or in their money, $2,000 a year. That's not sustainable in an economy. For the bottom 40%, they're making less than $765, so $13,000 a year. This gives birth to the credit industry. You can't afford that new vacuum cleaner? Get it on layaway, put it on credit. Not credit cards, but layaway, and then you pay interest on it. Well, that's all fine and good, buying radios if you're gainfully employed. But yeah, 1929, people are going to get unemployed. Not only have they lost their jobs, but they're in debt to the vacuum cleaner that they bought, to the radio that they bought, to the house that they bought, perhaps the clothes that they bought. So we've looked at this article before. It's the same problem we're having today. The top 1% have taken 50 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans. And again, what that means is since the early 1970s, production and profits have continued to rise, but wages have stayed stagnant. That was different before 1974, and there's a real reason for that. From the late 1940s, so late 1940s to the early 1970s, this is considered the golden age of the American economy. Production is up, profits are up, and wages are keeping up with production. So in many, perhaps not here because there has been intergenerational poverty. So people have been struggling for generations in this part of the world, in this part of the country. But it's not uncommon to run into an old timer, maybe a great grandpa, and to hear this conversation. I feel sorry for your generation. I didn't even graduate from high school, and I had a factory job, and I was able to raise my family of 5. We had health insurance. I bought my own home. I had a factory job. Why was this the golden era of our economy? A few reasons. The big reason is World War II. This part of the world, Europe, completely devastated. Their factories, their railroads, their hospitals, their universities destroyed. This part of the world, also Japan. This part of the world, China, also greatly destroyed. For the United States, yeah, we lost 500,000 soldiers, no discounting that. Pearl Harbor got attacked. But we didn't get bombed. We didn't get carpet bombed. And so, yeah, Europe is in ashes. Japan is in ashes. China is in ashes. And they need to rebuild their societies. They need tractors. They need cars. They need whatever it takes to build factories. Where are they going to purchase that, do you think, after World War II? The United States of America.
And then we have like the Rosie the Riveter and all the women coming into the workplace, and they're spending their money differently than men did also.
Yeah, I mean, the 1920s is the beginning of the consumer culture. After World War II, that is institutionalized. Yeah, you have women who are in the workforce. They're expected to go home after World War II, but understand that Rosie the Riveter term, that was women factory workers. Men are off fighting, so women are doing jobs that men normally did for the war machine. That's also the basis of second wave feminism. Some women went home and did the traditional role of staying home. Other women, or husbands come home going, dude, I've been making money. I'm making good money. I ain't staying home. We're going to do this together. And this is the beginning of the feminist movement, the second wave feminist movement that we begin in the 1950s. Why does it end? Well, very simple reason. By the 1970s, it took 30 years for these economies to recover, for this economy to recover, for this economy to recover. So now there's global competition. And instead of our politicians going, oh, we've got global competition, we need to train workers, we need to provide further education, we need to reinvest into our cities. This began with Nixon. We struck a deal with China saying, hey, we will allow our corporations and give them tax incentives to set up shop in China, and Americans will get cheaper goods. Well, what's that done since the 1970s? The greatest employer in this country is Walmart now. And what we got out of that was cheap goods. That's not that too good of it. It wasn't a lot of foresight to deal with this real lived issue of, yeah, we were running on the fat of our victory in World War II. After the 1970s, that began to diminish. And unfortunately, we didn't have politicians or the American people going, oh, things have changed. We need to reinvest in our economy so we can still have people make money. Maybe they get a college degree. Maybe they don't have to get a college degree. Not everybody need to get a college degree to live a dignified life. Perhaps. I don't know. To bring this home, this is actually outdated. This goes back 10 years, but I think it's instructive to see what the wealth distribution looks like today. So let me make sure. Stop sharing. Share. I'm going to share it with you guys so you at least are able to see what's going on here. Okay.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us.
So what was being said there?
I can't tell if I feel validated or demoralized.
Well put. Yeah, it's both. So let's go over what they said there. 1% of the population has 40% of the wealth. 80% of the population has 7% of the wealth. I mean, this is not sustainable. And it's not an accident. This is due to legislation. This is due to tax cuts. This is due to not investing in our communities. This is due to, and this is what happens when 1% has the population, they buy it, media outlets, they buy politicians. They get politicians to say, let me give you guys more money, create legislation where I can give you endless amount of money. so I can control the narrative. Right? To give them grace, these are CEOs of corporations. The way our corporate structure is set up is they have to increase profits every 3 months, or they could be held liable by their shareholders. So they're caught in the system just as much as we are. They're living very comfortably, though. This can be fixed. It's been fixed before. It doesn't have to be this way. But if you've ever wondered why we are at each other's throats, why there's so much discourse and antagonism in our society, well, families going into further and further debt, young people looking at prospects of what their future is going to look like. It's any wonder why we are living in a society that is deeply unstable. And this is going on 15 years old. The problem has gotten worse. What I will say, though, is there is hope on the horizon. Both parties, I'm seeing younger candidates coming in and addressing from their political perspective how to fix this, because it's becoming clear to conservative people and to liberal people across this country that this is unsustainable. So it's not all lost. And understand, too, that in a short amount of time, things can get really bad based on government policy. But as I mentioned before, things can turn around within a year, maybe even less. People getting subsidies from the government when the entire economy was shut down due to the pandemic, again, within a year. 50% of childhood poverty was eliminated. With a little bit of money, too. $1,000 a month is what people were generally getting. I think $1,200 a month for a little while there. That's pocket change. But that's enough to go.
Like 100% of food insecurity in children was relieved.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a heavy lift to fix these issues. It's what the problem is we think the economy is a state of nature. Like this, oh, this is just what the economy looks like. No, economies are always contrived by human beings, whether it's inequitable or whether it is more equitable. It's never an accident. That's due to legislation. That's due to people like you and I getting involved and saying, dude, let's do something that makes sense. Obviously, it's probably a good system in capitalism to have incentives for people to take chances, to risk a lot, to go into business so they can live very comfortable lives. But as this video was suggesting, is there any merit to a CEO making 380 times more than the average worker, not the lowest paid worker? And again, if you think that, well, that does make sense. Practically speaking, the end result is that's less money in our pockets. We're not able to buy their things. And it's what leads to a collapse in the economy and a lot of destabilization. And if it continues, this is where we see politicians like Adolf Hitler saying, oh, the economy's collapsed, give me all the power and I will fix things, right? It's a direct threat to our democratic institutions. So we're getting out of time here. Let me just go. This just more people are getting image oriented. Advertisers understand this is new. This begins in the 1920s, focusing on people's insecurities. Literally, advertisers saying smoking is good for you, can help you lose weight, right? That kind of stuff, and people believing that because they see it everywhere they go. That kind of stuff. Be very careful what you bring into your body. Not just the food, but what you see. If you're constantly looking at this thing and bringing in advertisements, you're not in control of your behavior if you let too much in. It is good to put the screens on pause for a couple hours a day, just so you can gain some clarity about what is actually good for you. So, yeah, we're seeing a lot of overproduction happening by the time we get to the mid-1920s. And here's just the basic issue. So it's not just if one industry starts to suffer, it affects them all if one industry starts to suffer. So if people don't have enough green in their pocket, like we saw in the 1920s, to buy all of these automobiles that are being produced by Ford or Chevy, Well, it's not just the automobile industry. The automobile industry has contracts with the textile industry, the oil industry, obviously, the rubber industry, the steel industry. So people quit buying cars, it affects them and their workers. Industry slows, which causes unemployment. And if people are getting laid off, lower wages, which helps contribute to further losses to the automobile industry, which also then, as time goes on, contributes to further losses to steel, to rubber, to textile, to oil. I used to have all the time young men come to me mid-semester going, hey, I'm dropping out. I got a great job in the oil rigs. That's not happening anymore. That's been about the last 3 years. I'm seeing a huge decline in young men coming up to me going, I'm making big money in North Texas. Those jobs are drying up. Poor economic intelligence. I'm going to kind of just blaze through. Yeah, the politicians in the 1920s are just making this stuff up. Let's lower taxes for the rich. Let's raise tariffs at an extraordinary level. It'll work out. It'll work out. It'll work out. They don't have any data to back this up. That begins in the 1930s. Under the FDR, he brought the greatest minds of economists going, I don't know the answers. Give me some information. And this is where you begin to see things like polls, right? People polled, the Gallup poll, that began in the 1930s. Seeing what people are thinking, what's going on in industries. They don't have that in the 1920s. And banks, huge problem. Banks were poorly regulated. When one failed, others failed. What you're seeing in this picture here is literally a run on the bank. People trying to get their money out and they're closing the doors. Their life savings is in that bank. And that's happening all over the country. In the first 6 months of 1929, 346 banks failed. This is the beginning of the Great Depression, right? And then the stock market crashes. The stocks, understand what the stock market is. It is basically a slush fund for industry, for corporate America. Right? So they make money because you buy their stuff, but that isn't enough money. What they do is they make their corporations public and they give small-time investors and big-time investors the opportunity to buy stocks, literally own the company, and they use that to buy new warehouses, new factories, new machinery for their factories. Well, since this whole economy was just a paper tiger, and once that became apparent, there's not enough people who have jobs anymore, consumer spending is down, tariffs are causing foreign markets not to buy our stuff anymore, and big wealthy investors saw the writing on the wall and are calling their stock market brokers and saying, sell every single one of my stocks. That's going to cause huge problems because, yeah, if you are a very wealthy individual who's interested in making more money, you're going to look at the stock market, you're going to look at your losses and going, no way in hell am I opening up another factory or a warehouse or a storefront, because nobody's going to buy these stocks, let alone buy the products I'm trying to produce for consumers. Stock market crash destroyed domestic and foreign borrowing and lending. Right now, banks aren't lending money. That's what leads to the banks beginning to collapse. They're just not lending out money. I need a new car. Sorry, I don't care how much money you make. The economy is going to crash. There's no way, because you're going to have to default on this next year. We're not lending money to you. And prevailing attitudes are going to hinder effective economic action. What does that mean? That bullet point means there's still this idea that, don't worry, yeah, we're going to have some rough times for a couple of years, but the market will correct itself. It's not. It's not during this time period. So enters Herbert Hoover, this poor guy, who is going to get blamed for the entire Great Depression. It's totally blamed for it. So first phase of his administration, it's simply the economy lacks confidence. That happens. The economy it'll course correct. We don't have to do anything. Okay. Things are going bad to worse by the time we get to 1930. And so they create grant programs, they're basically saying to local governments and state governments, why don't you guys start using your coffers to lend money to people and get people out of this. Well, they don't have any money, so that's not working. Phase 3 is actually something he did quite successfully. That will be the backdrop of what FDR will pick up. He has some legislation passed called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC. And basically this is, it's going to do a couple of things. This part of the country, the South, a lot of people are living here still in the 1920s. They don't have electricity. There's no private market that sees any economic investment to do so. So the economy's crashed. What a great opportunity for the government to go, let's get these people electricity and at the same time put millions of people to work by creating things like this, the Hoover Dam. So this is somewhat like both a mixture of trickle-down economics and Keynesian economics. So it's long lasting. People are going to get electricity. It takes hundreds of thousands of workers to build this. And to this day, there's thousands of workers that maintain this, engineers, construction workers, right? So for generations, this has paid dividends. So whatever thousands of dollars were put into this, millions of dollars, that has been paid back 100-fold over the last 4 generations, right? Yeah, 1.2, and within 6 months, $1.2 billion in circulation in the economy. And that's key, right? Currency, money. Healthy economies have a current of money. One of the reasons why a maldistribution of wealth is not very good is, if 1% has 40% of the wealth, well, those people aren't coming down here from New York or Chicago to shop at our locally owned restaurants. And for us that are scraping by, we don't have that money. So like my family, maybe go out to dinner 3-4 times a year. It's a treat. Birthday, right? Somebody accomplished something. Let's celebrate. Let's go out to dinner, right? So you need a circulating economy. This is beginning to help, but it's a little bit too late. And he gets blamed for the entire Great Depression, Herbert Hoover, because he's kind of sitting on the sidelines, doing something towards the end of his presidency, but it's too little too late. So what you're seeing here is a Hooverville, shantytown, which the thing about the Great Depression, notice what type of people you're seeing here. Where are all these people? How do we describe these people? Yeah, but describe their characteristics.
White.
They're white. What the Black community, the Mexican American community is saying, oh, welcome. Right? They've been experiencing this for generations. And it is sort of a reflection of the problems of white supremacy. These things aren't paid attention to. I remember reading The Grapes of Wrath in high school, and it was clear to me like, oh, this is happening to white people.
I asked my grandma lived through the Great Depression. I was like, what was it like? Is that why you're so frugal? Like, she will save food. She does not throw a single scrap of food away, not like the crust to her bread, nothing. And then I asked her, what's it like living through the Great Depression? She's like, we didn't notice. We didn't know that there was anything happening in the economy. We were too poor to realize.
Yeah, it was business as usual. Right? Once it affects the greater white community, this is a problem. Yeah, I had this, my grandpa, I remember getting my hand slapped when I would like get peanut butter out at her house and then have a big blob of peanut butter and just throw it in the sink. What are you doing? She was a child during the Great Depression. You would never do that because that peanut butter could be the only food you get for the entire day. People starved to death during the Great Depression. Literally, people ate the shoe leather off their shoes. They would boil it and cut it up, and it would give you some nourishment, your children some nourishment. Who's that? Yeah, so you see a lot of this. Jobless men keep going. We can't take care of our own. So it's not like, hopefully we don't see this in the next year or two, but today you get laid off and like, okay, I'll look around, see if I get a job somewhere else. These are men who've probably been traveling for hundreds of miles, getting on trains, walking, looking for jobs. There are no jobs. And this is an unfortunate thing about the New Deal. You see relevance today. 1,500 Mexican Americans loaded on a train. Here we have Mexican and Mexican American families wait to board Mexico-bound trains to Los Angeles on March 8th, 1932. County officials arranged these mass departures as part of reparation campaigns fueled by fears that Mexicans and Mexican Americans were taking scarce jobs. So when the economy takes a downturn, people will be scapegoated. And there is some rationale, as odious as this is, yeah, if we can get rid of a certain population that is also desperate for jobs, then that's more jobs for white people, and perhaps wages will go up. So understand, a downturn economy isn't just, oh, that sucks, I'm not gonna have a lot of money. The implications are tragic. These people were not born, a lot of these people weren't born south of the border. Their families have been living in this part of the world for generations. And because of the color of their skin, because of their culture, they're easily otherized. And when things fall apart, yeah, get them out of here. Happened in the 1930s, happened in the 1950s. It's happening today. Yeah, look at his face. Look how gaunt he is. I don't know who this guy is, but he looks like judging by his suit, he looks like somebody that might have been making it in the 1920s. And who will help get a job? Who will help me get a job? I do not want charity. So there's some certain dignity in his sign there. Don't give me a sandwich. Don't give me money. Give me a job, man. I'll do whatever. I need work. And the Great Depression is a fit term for it, because it's not just that people don't have any money, especially back then. What is the role of a man? Provide. The suicide rates for men are going to skyrocket during the 1930s. And this is true today. This is why it's a problem to essentialize people. Because if you view yourself as a man and it's your responsibility to protect and provide, well, what does that mean about you if you can't? No fault of your own. There are no any jobs. You're still a human being. You still matter to your wife and to your kids. Yeah, suicide rates, drinking, alcoholism skyrockets because these people have lost their identity. Something easily I could relate to. I don't know what it would be like if I lost my job. How could I show up for my family? I would have to dig deep into my soul to maintain my dignity and to be there as a human being for my family, despite the fact that I don't have any money. That's a tall order to ask for people who've been enculturated as men to always provide. And if you can't, then what kind of man are you? Right? Huge skyrockets and suicide at this time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for enduring this talk. It's very depressing. It is discouraging. It's also validating. And understand that it's not without hope. Again, to reflect back onto iron-jawed angels, yes, you have high-profile people like Alice Paul that clearly was gifted with an intellect, kind of the equivalent of, a famous basketball player with athletics like Michael Jordan. No matter how hard you work, you'll never be as good of a basketball player as Michael Jordan. But underneath Alice Paul were ordinary people, mothers, workers, who contributed to that movement and found success. Without them, Alice Paul is not an historical figure. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you tomorrow. Let me know if you need anything, and I'll talk with you later. Thank you, Sophia, for joining. I guess Cena lost her battery, so talk to her later.
I will be messaging you probably or jump on your Zoom tomorrow just to see which is marking complete and which is not. I don't know why. I will finish it and then when I go back, it doesn't say complete.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be in about 10:30.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be in a little later than I usually am on Fridays. So I'll talk to you later. I'm gonna
Thank you. Bye bye.
take care.